In a world already tense with rival powers and fragile alliances, a new question has begun to echo through strategic circles. Could North Korea ever send its army to Iran? At first, the idea sounds unlikely, almost impossible. Yet history often moves in ways that surprise even the most experienced analysts. To understand why such a scenario is discussed today, we must look carefully at the relationships connecting Pyongyang, Tehran, Beijing, and Moscow. North Korea and Iran are separated by thousands of kilometers, different cultures, and different histories. Yet since the late 20th century, the two states have shared one important similarity. Both have faced heavy sanctions from the United States and its allies. Because of this pressure, they gradually developed quiet channels of cooperation, especially in the fields of missiles and military technology. During the 1980s, Iran fought a long and destructive war with Iraq. The conflict lasted from 1980 to 1988 and forced Iran to search for weapons wherever it could find them. At that time, North Korea was willing to sell missiles and military equipment. Analysts believe that some early Iranian missile systems were influenced by North Korean designs developed during the Cold War period. The relationship remained largely hidden from public view for decades. However, intelligence reports from the 1990s and early 2000s frequently mentioned technical cooperation between the two governments. These connections were usually limited to weapons development, not the deployment of soldiers. North Korea historically kept its military forces inside its own territory. North Korea's army is one of the largest standing forces in the world. Estimates often place its active personnel above 1 million soldiers. The country maintains this large military mainly because of the unresolved conflict on the Korean peninsula. The Korean War began in 1950 and ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a formal peace treaty. Because the war technically never ended, North Korea focuses heavily on defending its border with South Korea. The militarized zone that divides the peninsula remains one of the most fortified borders on Earth. For decades, this reality limited North Korea's ability or desire to deploy troops far beyond East Asia. Yet global politics began to shift in the early 21st century. Rivalry between the United States, Russia, and China intensified. Conflicts such as the war in Ukraine after 2022 demonstrated that modern alliances can take unexpected forms. Military cooperation between sanctioned or politically isolated states became more visible in global debates. Reports in 2024 and 2025 suggested that North Korea might be supplying artillery shells and rockets to Russia during the Ukraine conflict. Although details remain disputed, the discussion itself showed how strategic partnerships could expand when countries face common pressure. Analysts started to consider whether military cooperation might go further in the future. Iran also occupies a central place in global geopolitical tensions. Located in the Middle East and bordering the Persian Gulf, Iran holds significant influence in regional politics. Its relations with Western powers have been strained since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, when new political system replaced the monarchy and challenged American influence in the region. Over the years, Iran developed strong ties with Russia and a complex but important relationship with China. Russia and Iran cooperated in Syria during the civil war that intensified after 2011. China, meanwhile, expanded economic and energy partnerships with Tehran as part of its broader global trade ambitions. China and Russia often present themselves as supporters of a multipolar world, meaning a global system where power is shared among several major states rather than dominated by a single superpower. Iran and North Korea, both facing Western sanctions, sometimes appear within this wider geopolitical conversation. Despite these connections, the idea of North Korean troops deploying to Iran remains highly speculative. There has never been confirmed evidence that Pyongyang plans to station its army in the Middle East. Logistical challenges alone would be enormous. The distance between North Korea and Iran is more than 6,000 kilometers. Transporting large military forces across such distance would require air or sea routes passing through multiple regions. It would also raise major international reactions. Any direct troop deployment would likely trigger diplomatic crises and further sanctions, making it a risky decision for all governments involved. However, military cooperation can take many forms that stop short of sending soldiers. Training missions, technology transfers, missile development, and intelligence sharing are all possibilities often discussed by researchers who study global security. These forms of cooperation are harder to detect and easier for governments to deny. Russia and China also play careful roles in this strategic environment. Both countries maintain relationships with Iran and North Korea, but must balance those ties with broader global interests. Beijing especially tends to avoid direct military confrontation, preferring economic influence and diplomatic negotiation. Moscow, on the other hand, has historically used military partnerships more openly when it sees strategic advantage. Its cooperation with Syria and Iran during the Syrian conflict demonstrated how regional alliances can shift the balance of power in specific theaters of war. For China and Russia, stability in the Middle East is important because of energy routes, trade corridors, and global markets. Neither country would easily support a move that could trigger a major international crisis unless their strategic interests were clearly involved. The debate about North Korean troops in Iran therefore reveals more about global uncertainty than about an immediate military plan. Analysts raise the question because the world is entering a period where traditional alliances are changing and new partnerships appear between states facing similar pressures. History repeatedly shows that international politics is shaped by interests rather than permanent friendships. Countries cooperate when their goals align and distance themselves when circumstances change. The relationships between North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia must be understood within this long pattern of strategic calculation. At the moment, the evidence points mainly to diplomatic support and limited military cooperation rather than the deployment of armies. Yet the discussion itself reminds observers that global security is constantly evolving. Decisions made in one region can influence tensions far beyond its borders. Understanding these connections requires looking not only at headlines, but also at history, geography, and political motivations. When analysts ask whether North Korea could deploy troops to Iran, they are really examining how power, alliances, and rivalry are reshaping the international system in the 21st century. In the end, the possibility remains uncertain, but the strategic relationships behind the question reveal a deeper story. It is a story about shifting power, competing visions of world order, and the careful calculations that shape decisions made by governments far from the public eye.